in by saying one of the exciting things about working on An Enemy of the People is the way in which it's this strange hybrid of German tradition or German culture artifact and a Canadian piece as well. And I've always been interested in how these two theater cultures, actually in their differences. I was, many years ago, a hospitant at a German theater, and a hospitant is a kind of an assistant director. It's basically involved in getting props set up for the actors and getting cigarettes for them as well, and sect. And when I went to Germany for the first time, this was in 1990, I was just so floored by the differences in scenographically and just how these shows looked. I mean, language aside, I became really curious about what's underpinning German theater. What's the starting point? Why are these plays that I think I know, a lot of classical plays that I think I know, Hamlet, Long Day's Journey into Night, whatever it is, why do they look and sound like that? I have no idea. I come from this, our English-Canadian theater tradition, which has, to a greater or lesser degree, a kind of fealty to the author and what the author's doing. So what we thought is that we would start off by showing you some clips of contemporary productions of Enemy of the People, most of them from Germany, but a couple, one from Broadway as well, just to give you an idea of a starting point in terms of the differences. If you're not aware, if you've never seen clips of German theater and its audacity, then this might give you a little taste, and then we can start into conversation from there. Yeah. Sound good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe we can turn up the light. Yep. Good. Excellent. And one thing I want to say, by way of preface, so for one thing, of course, the German clips are in German. And the reason we're showing them to you is really for the visual impact more than for the language. And I'll probably cut some of them short. The other thing I should say is that none of them are at all avant-garde in the German context. The first one we'll show you is probably the most is the most sort of adventurous within the German context, but not especially. And they're all from provincial theaters. So not from Berlin, not from Munich, not from Hamburg. Sorry?
Not from Oslo.
Certainly not from Oslo. What you'll see is about as mainstream gets within the German theatre, within the contemporary German theatre tradition. So this first one is a trailer. They're all trailers, and you can actually find them online if you've been looking. This first one is from the theatre in Bonn, former capital, now returned back to the provincial state that it existed in for hundreds of years before it became the capital.
In den Zuflussrohren zum Wohnhaus. Und derselbe verfluchte giftige Dreck sickert auch am Strand aus. Und zwar stelle ich den Antrag, die Versammlung möge dem Badearzt nicht gestatten, seine Darstellung des Sachverhaltes vorzulesen oder vorzutragen. Danke. Was? So das denn halt? Silenzium, meine Herren! Ich darf den Antrag des Herrn Bürgermeisters unterstützen. Es ist meine Meinung, dass die Agitation des Dr. Stockmann einen Hintergedanken hat. Er spricht vom Bad, aber was er wirklich meint, ist eine Revolution. Ich bin auch ein Freund der Selbstverwaltung einer Bürgerschaft. Aber nur, wenn sie den Steuerzahler nicht zu teuer kommen. Das ist meine Meinung. Auch ich fühle mich veranlasst, meinen Standpunkt zu erklären. Zunächst schien Dr. Stockmanns Argumentation auf erhebliche Zustimmung zu stoßen. Doch dann stellte sich heraus, dass wir uns durch eine falsche Darstellung haben, in die Irre führen lassen. Ich wiederhole, durch eine falsche Darstellung. Meine Pflicht gegenüber der Gesellschaft geboten zu bekämpfen und wenn möglich aufzeigen, dass er verhängnisvollen Weg hineingeschlagen hat. Der Gedanke an seine Familie, der Gedanke an seine Frau und seine unversorgten Kinder. Danke. Ja, richtig. Danke.
Thomas! Kann ich? Es gibt noch eines auf der Welt, was ein freier Mann nicht kann. Weißt du, was es ist?
Nein?
Ich sag's dir. Ein freier Mann kann sich nicht so verhalten, dass er sich selbst ins Gesicht spucken müsste.
That's a giant gummy bear.
That last bit must be the end. It's a song. It's a pop song called "Songs About the End of Capitalism." Shall I just put the Broadway thing up? I think. Yeah. Yes. So this is what this looks like in an American mainstream production. And again, this is I think it's important. So this is as mainstream of what you're about to see as what you just in our cultural context as.
You never were very bright, Tom. You don't see the hole you've dug for yourself, do you?
I don't see any hole, show me.
It's a gaping great hole, big enough for you, your wife, and 3 children.
What do you say?
I've helped you, haven't I?
And I've been grateful.
I don't want your gratitude. It's been as much for my sake as yours. Do you think someone in my position can afford to be associated with scandal?
You think I'm scandalous?
You invite controversy.
I don't.
You do. You have to write and shout about every new complaint or idea that you have. You have to read about your own anger in the paper before you can truly feel it.
It's my duty to share what I feel with the public.
You always were a selfish bastard. Who gave you that job at the dad?
There wouldn't have been any balance if I hadn't seen that this was the perfect climate for a spa town. I pushed the idea for years. I wrote about it. Pages of endless reports I wrote.
You weren't even resident here. We were here. We knew when the time was right for it.
And then you mucked it all up. You and your brilliant damned associates.
You're aching for a fight. You never could take authority, could you? I have told you what's at stake, and I'm not about to compromise.
So what will you do?
You've been stupid enough to... You're just going to have to retract the whole thing publicly.
What did you just say?
You're going to find that you've been mistaken.
Am I?
You will express your confidence in the committee and its commitment to ongoing improvements which may be merely cosmetic.
You have to reroute the whole system, Peter!
As an employee, you have the right to tell me anything.
I haven't the right.
No, you work for me, Thomas. And you'll find in your contract that one of the rules is that you're not allowed to contradict a superior.
I'm a doctor. I'm a man of science. That's a freaking
The world doesn't revolve around your science. It's about money.
So I have a question. I have a question for Holger. So, and maybe this is way too broad, but I mean, you can see these are typical productions in a way of two cultures, two theater cultures. Why? What is there? What do you think are some of the aspects or characteristics of German theater that really separate it from our our vocabulary of English Canadian theater making?
All right, so I think, well, I'll start with that last clip, right, with the Broadway thing, because so basically what in making that show, right, I mean, as you can sort of tell just from looking at that, in making that show, the people behind it sort of took the text and said, okay, well, when was this written? When is this set? What does that look like? Yeah, okay, so it's Norway, late 19th century, so that dictates costume. It dictates what the set looks like. It's going to approximate a real living room or real, whatever that is, live-in kitchen. But it's going, right, so the set tries to reflect the historical reality in which the play is set, more or less one-to-one. Right? And then the people in it will act as if they're real people, as if they were really the brothers Stockmann, and they're going to sound more or less like the way that real people sound on stage. Which is a convention, right? I mean, no one really sounds like that in real life, but even Harper doesn't enunciate like that. But the goal clearly is, the goal of the show clearly is to take a dramatic text and recreate and create the world that text imagines in a fairly straightforward way on stage. If you look at that German production, that's obviously not what they were doing. Right? That doesn't mean that there isn't a connection between the show and the text. For one thing, in that that Bonn production actually uses Ibsen's text, more of Ibsen's text than the Schaubühne production that then became this show, the show you're about to see. It's a more literal translation of Ibsen in many ways. But if you just look at the scenography, so what the stage is doing in that Bonn production, in practically every shot we saw, there was water in one way or another. Right? In that council session, there was water running down the wall behind them. The very opening shot is him drinking a glass of water and collapsing. Right? There's that weird plexiglass enclosure, and I have no idea what that is.
It's like an aquarium.
Yeah, that's right.
Swimming behind it.
Exactly. So in the scene with that monument, with that monumental foot that Stockmann is climbing on, don't ask me why there's a monumental foot, I don't know. But you can see that the stage, if you look closely, you can see that the stage is actually covered in water. There's water running over the edge of the stage next to him. So there's something like the element which is central to the play, right, of poisoned water that is sort of, that drives the entire action of the play, access to water, the inability to do anything with that water, the desire to do something with it, although you know morally you really shouldn't, is realized in that set, in the way that water is constantly everywhere. Right? Now, that does something with the text. It takes Ibsen's text and says, okay, so water is a central image, it's a central obsession in this play, so we'll turn it into a central scenic obsession of the production. But not in a particularly straightforward way. Right? You simply see, you take a metaphor, the water stands for something, right? And a presence that's in the text, and you translate it into a visual metaphor on stage, and into a visual presence on stage. That's an interpretative act, right? You're putting yourself in a relationship with the play. But what you don't have, and this is something universally true in German theatre, what you don't have is this idea that the text creates a world, and your job as a theatre artist is to create the world that the author imagined on stage.
So why, I mean, I'm going to be the devil's advocate here, why such contempt for the author? Why do we ignore the stage directions? How dare directors, designers, dramaturgs, this team of people presume that they have a greater authority than the author?
Because of time. Because the events that happened then could be similar, but not exactly unique to that. And so it has to be brought up into the modern world.
Yeah, I think that's partly it, right? That yes, so that the play's over 100 years old, so you have to help the author remain current or remain relevant. Now one may disagree or agree with this, right? But it's so that is, I mean, there's a very Now, going further than that, though, there is I think it's, so we ask what the broad consensus, and this is fracturing, especially in Britain, but the broad consensus in the English-speaking theatre world is, I think, you judge the success of a performance, or most people, most critics in particular, judge the success of a performance on the basis of whether that performance has served the text well. Whether it has produced a production that does a service to the text. And whatever attitudes you might have, whatever issues or preoccupations you have as a director, as an actor, as a designer, should be muted to the extent that they don't serve the text. What your job is to focus on the author's preoccupations and bring those out. Now, in the German context, that question is asked, or that standard is set in a very different way. In that the question is not how do you serve the text well, but what are you trying to say? Why are you? What does a particular play allow you to say? What points, often political points, does a particular play enable you to make on stage in a way that is aesthetically, scenically, dramaturgically interesting? Right? So the standard then isn't, are you being true to the play? But are you putting on an interesting and compelling performance that this particular play allows you to create? Which is to say, to get David's advocate question, the answer is basically, well, it's not a question of disrespect for the author. It's a question of putting the author in a collaborative relationship and putting theatre first, not the text. It's saying, a dramatist, and many dramatists will subscribe to this, and especially in Germany, contemporary dramatists. It's assuming that the production starts from the basic assumption that a play, a work of drama, is not the same as a staged performance of that play, and that there is a huge wealth of aspects of a performance that the playwright can't anticipate, and that a playwright has to cede or authority over. And if a playwright isn't prepared to do that, he or she should be a novelist.
Yeah, I think it goes back to this idea, and it's got a long, especially European tradition of trying to not disenfranchise the author from the theater-making process, but to establish that the theater is not necessarily a literary form. And this goes back to the turn of the 20th century. We had theorists and directors and designers like Edward Gordon Craig, who was a British, at one point an actor, but then he became a director and a designer and theorist, who talked about that theater is essentially a sculptural and a dance form, in a sense. It's about the three dimensions of theater rather than its literary character. A French director and theorist, Artaud, later on in the century, talked about the need for disenfranchising the writer. There are political roots and underpinnings to that movement, and I wonder if it's fruitful to just touch on how history and, in a sense, economics offer some reasons for this, the feeling that authors and authority itself need to be interrogated.
Yeah.
In other words, you're saying, what was the message in the 19th century? Is it the same message in the 21st century?
Yeah.
Of this particular. Sure. Yes.
If I can say, maybe, and Holger, leap in and correct me if I'm going wrong here. But I think one of the things that makes Canadian theater and German theater so different is, on the one hand, how central theater is to German culture. That theater was once it was an instrument that helped to unify the German-speaking culture. It was one of the ways in which German culture, before Germany was Germany, to gain a kind of national self-confidence. And theater was an instrument for that. Every town and small city and larger city, a self-respecting city, has its own theater company, has its own opera company. That's still the case today. It's why German theater is not as centralized. It's not centralized as much as Anglo theater tends to be. So that's important, and that it's well funded. Less so today than it used to be, but it's still really, really well funded. Means that experimentation is in fact mainstream. That's the question. You just sort of said it's a distortion, and it's definitely a distortion. But the distortion is the result of questioning an idea of authority and, to use a terrible word, canonicity. Who gets to be the authority? If the question at the end of the Second World War is, if we as a culture revered Schiller and Goethe and Shakespeare and all of these great writers who we held up on a pedestal, that they were to help us as civilizing forces, how did we end up with Auschwitz? And what good is the idea of education, and of Bildung is the German word, but of praising and worshiping in the feet of these great authors, if we're simply obeying them? And what is our role as an audience, passively accepting our kind of enjoyment of these writers? So that there was a whole new generation, and this is happening, of course, society-wide, but within the theater, a whole generation of, yes, some writers, but also directors and designers who are sort of saying, let's break open these texts. Let's not treat them with kid gloves anymore. And let's see what that means for us as audiences and theater makers in terms of our new relationship to the quote-unquote authority of old texts. So it's about yes, provocation at times, yes, distortion, but it doesn't mean that it's random or doesn't have its own integrity in a way. And so that's.
I mean, okay. So here the
yes, I'm wrong.
Right? No. I don't think you're wrong. I mean the historically speak. Well, I make two historical points. Right? So I'll jump from what you just said. So it's definitely true that one major break in the German theater tradition does occur after the Second World War. In that, and it's true that one thing that gets associated with the Nazis and the Nazis' approach to theater is a particular faithfulness to the text. In fact, the German word for that, which is Werktreue, was first popularized by the Nazi press. Like one of the first recorded uses of that word is in the pages of the Nazi party newspaper. So that puts a certain taint on that very thought that being faithful to the work is a good idea. That kind of made that an impossible aesthetic position after the end of Nazi Germany, right? So and of course the fact that Goethe, Schiller, Shakespeare, and Beethoven were treasures of the Nazi aesthetic. Meant okay, you now have to reclaim. It would be foolish to say we can't read these authors anymore. We can't stage their plays anymore. But at the same time, there was obviously a moment where you have to say, okay, well, we have to rediscover them. We have to do something that's clearly different from what the Nazis did with those plays. But that's not the point of origin for this sort of approach to theatre. In fact, if you go back to the First World War, the idea that plays from the past play a vital role in the present, and in particular in contemporary political debates, is something that you can probably trace it back even further than that. But there's a famous moment right after the First World War when Jesner in Hamburg, one of the pioneers of 20th century German theatre, stages a production of Schiller's Wilhelm Tell in Hamburg, I think. And the production caused such an extended riot that they had to bring the curtain down 3 times. And then at one point, the actor playing the tyrannical, count? Is he a count? In the play, who was costumed not explicitly, but fairly obviously as a German general, got into a shouting match with the audience, with the right wing half of the audience that mourned Germany's recent loss of the war, and he had a whip. He had a whip, and he basically, like, this line in the play was commanding silence, and he stood on stage, cracking his whip, shouting down the half of the audience that recognized his costume, which is really all it was, as an overt political distancing from the German military. And it got so, while the police had to come in multiple times, like I said, they brought the curtain down. The director didn't quite realize what he was doing, because he wanted to shut the show down. And Fritz Kortner is a very, very famous German actor, Jewish German actor, who played Gessner, that role. He said, no, we have to continue. And eventually they finished the show. But that sort of the idea that the staging of an 18th century play in 1919 can cause a riot, which is different from, say, the staging of something like Gorky's was it Sommerfolk in Moscow, when the audience fled. But at the end of that play, before sunrise. At the end of that play, there's a scene where the mob enters this country estate, and when on stage, the mob broke through the back wall. The audience panicked and everyone ran away because they thought an actual revolution was happening. But that was a contemporary play, right? So that theatre is obviously capable of sparking riots. Right? There's a long history of that. What's interesting in Germany, it's not exclusive to Germany, but one thing that happens repeatedly in German theatre culture is that these riots get sparked by performances of old plays, where you would think, okay, well, this is safely in the past, we can stage this. And that, to me, so now this has something to, so that tradition of using an old play to make a contemporary point, that goes back at least 100 years in Germany. And over those 100 years, that became an aesthetic imperative, right? That you can't just take an old play and stage it. What's the point of doing that? You might as well read it if all you want is exactly the play as it's written. Or you might film it. You might film an ideal performance and be done with it. The point is to figure out in rehearsal, really, right? Why it makes sense to stage this particular play now, and what you want to do with that particular play now. And those two things, so that's already true, I think, in the early 20th century. But what happened between then and now is that has become a criterion on which to judge the success of a performance, how consciously the company seems to have asked those questions, and how interesting and original an answer they have given to those questions. Right? So it's not. The question really isn't how is this performance true to the text and anything like that. The question is, what is this performance trying to do? Is that thing it's trying to do interesting and relevant? And how well is it doing it? And I think those aren't typically questions our critics tend to ask in performances.
You know, there's a role in the German theatre, in the institution of German theatre called the Dramaturg. And I think it might be interesting to talk a little bit about the role, the function of that particular play. So as what Holger's talking about, is a sort of a standard operating procedure of all theatres, is how do we make this more relevant, you know? how do we look at our own society through the lens of this particular old play, and how do we do it well, that the dramaturg becomes a really important figure in German institutions, theater institutions, in order to achieve that. And that's kind of it's a position that's not really, well, it's different, much different in Canada. The dramaturg or dramaturge, as they're often known in English Canada, they're kind of like most often a sort of playwright whisperer, you know, who will just kind of, you know, sort of be a sounding board, trying to guide that play towards, it's kind of what I'm doing at the moment, filling in for Andrea Romaldi as literary manager here, is the bulk of my work has to do with refining or taking the writer's, recognizing the impulse of the writer in conversations with the writer and helping them create a text. It's very different in Germany, and I wonder if you might want to talk a little bit about the role of the dramaturg in that process.
Yeah. So a dramaturg, and the dramaturg in Germany is really, the aspects of that job which aren't really relevant to this discussion, like the dramaturgs often do the initial casting, for instance. Right? They're crucially involved in putting together a season for theatre and so on. But the production dramaturgs, once they're involved with a particular show, they often create the first cut text. So the dramaturg will often cut the text before, in collaboration with the director, but man, this happens in every theatre in the world, right? It's almost never the case that the text you hear on stage is the full text of a play.
Yeah.
Because playwrights always write too much. So in Germany, it's the role of the dramaturg to rein in a playwright's expressive urges. Not usually in any kind of consultation with the playwright, even if they're still alive. Usually in consultation with the director. But then, in a way, that's the most boring aspect of the role of the dramaturg. So one thing, dramaturgs in Germany are always responsible for the program that you get on the night. Now, the thing you get in most German theatres as a program, actually this one is good, because we wrote that lovely, fairly long program there. So it's already an unusual program. But what you get in German theatre programs very frequently is basically a collection of essays and excerpts from theoretical works or historical works or things of that nature that are in some way connected to the production. Not the play. Right? So in the programs for most recent productions of Enemy of the People, you will get some essays on neoliberalism. You'll get some essays on environmentalism. You might get essays on individualism. Right? And these are on the crisis of democracy, right? Like in the 21st century. Now, very often the dramaturgs are responsible for putting those together for the audience. But they also put those things together for the director and the cast. So often early on in the rehearsal process, in the 8 to 10 weeks of the rehearsal process, it's about 3 times the length of a normal Canadian theatre.
The Tarragon will rehearse for 4 weeks, which is sort of exceptional. The rule is about 3 weeks. And then we'll have a week of previews as well. So 5 weeks before opening of the Tarragon, and that's exceptional.
So it's at least twice that in most German theatres, and you don't have previews. There are no previews whatsoever. That really doesn't exist. You just start. So at the beginning of that much more drawn-out process, very often dramaturg will come in with a stack of books and say, so here's a bunch of stuff that I think will help you with this production. And then the director might read them or throw them away. Or the director might read them and give them to the cast and say, here, you should all read this. And then they might sit down for a week and have a long discussion about the theoretical and philosophical and political background of their production and what to do with that in a theatrical format. right? So there's a kind of, but that's a fairly academic thing to do, I suppose you could say, right? It's a little bit like a seminar, but that is very often part of the early stages of the rehearsal process in German theatre, and that's largely the dramaturg's responsibility. I mean, the director plays a role in that as well, obviously. But so the dramaturg plays a very important role in framing productions in political, theoretical, philosophical terms. And that's a role that really doesn't exist, right? Partly because it actually hands over quite a lot of responsibility to dramaturgs. And then, actually, I'm just reading the diary of a German dramaturg in the early 90s, as he was taking a leading role in one of the East German theaters just after the wall came down.
Schedelmann?
No, Michael Ebert. It just came out. It was published 2 days ago. And he has this great sentence where the first production he works on, he feels like, because he's West German, he feels he has absolutely no connection with the actors. They're doing something completely unlike what he's used to. The director, whom he's worked with multiple times before, doesn't seem to be interested in what he's doing anymore. And he has the sentence where he says, it's what you, the way you cope as a dramaturg with the disappearance of all your energy into the process. Because no one knows, even in Germany where dramaturgs are well established, no one really knows what dramaturgs do. So their name is in the program, but if you ask a German theatre goer, so what does a dramaturg do? They go, well, I have no idea. The name is in the program. So the way you cope with the disappearance of all your energy into the process is by seeing the effect you've had at the end. And what's frustrating, what drove him mad about that first production he did in East Berlin was that he couldn't see any effect of his energy in the end product.
Sounds like motherhood.
I wouldn't know, but it sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Now, so in the case of this particular production, we can maybe say a few words about that, right? I mean, with the Enemy of the People. So that is the text for that production was put together by Florian Borchmeier, who is the head dramaturg of the Schaubühne, which meant that he worked. I mean, I don't actually know if Florian speaks Norwegian. I think he's but I think he must have worked from the first German translation, which was authorized by Ibsen. Right? But he essentially produced a new translation of the text, or a new version of the text. Cut it, amalgamate, got rid of the two children that are in Ibsen. It's two, right? Introduced a baby instead, and turned
Petra and Katerina then become one character.
Right. Yes. So she's no longer teenage. She's like in her early 20s, I guess. The daughter. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
So the daughter, there's a young daughter in Ibsen who has an affair or is in love with the newspaper editor, and that figure and the mother are amalgamated in this version. Which again, that's actually, I mean, that's something that's a completely standard operation in German dramaturgy. It's okay, well, these three characters seem to be fulfilling more or less the same function. Why can't that be one? Finding economies like that, also not that unusual in the English-speaking theatre world. No. Right? Amalgamating characters is a completely normal thing you do whenever you do Shakespeare because there are just too many. And no one can tell them apart, can tell the minor characters apart anyway. So might as well turn them into one figure. But yeah, okay, so I guess in that case, so the question a dramaturg might ask, okay, what function do these characters fulfill in the play? And is it necessary to have multiple figures fulfill that function, or can we, is it just as possible to have them all performed by the same character? And then you reshape the text. Now, that said, right, so the version that was then translated for this production, and which has Florian's name on it, that version of the text was not what the process began with. It's what the rehearsal process ended with. So there's scenes in that text that aren't really Florian Borchmeyer's. They're the actors. They're things that happened in rehearsal that they then incorporated into the production permanently. And so it's sort of a funny, I mean, the dramaturg isn't really an author. In this particular case, because it's a new translation and so on, it has become a text that you can also acquire, that other theatres in Germany can also acquire on stage and have. But in many ways, what Florian did with this play was what a dramaturg in Germany does with a play. Right? You cut it, you reshape it, and you hand it over.
Yeah. I should also add that production, the 2012 Schaubühne production of Enemy of the People, is also part of a larger investigation that's gone on for about 10 years with that particular artistic team, an investigation that looks at globalization and neoliberalism in Germany through the lens of Ibsen. So they've done productions of Doll's House, Hedda Gabler, John Gabriel Borkman, and Enemy of the People, all kind of exploring the ways in which contemporary, globalized Berlin can be expressed through the stories and characters of Ibsen. That's the focus. So Florian Borchmeyer's own adaptation and the design of the show, which is pretty closely mimicked, though altered somehow in some ways here, that design comes out of about 10 years of other productions as well. So these are conversations that are going on not only between the text and the director and the dramaturge, but also in relation to their own work and their own explorations prior to that. So yeah, I mean, working on this, it's just such this amazing hybrid. It recognizes the kind of collaborative nature of all theater. That you start with what the playwright's words, and because theater is an art form of presence in the present tense, and it's got that our time exerts itself, and your experiences as audience members exert itself on a production. You create the meanings of the production. The author doesn't really, because as Holger was saying before, at a certain time, at a certain place, the author can never know all the multiple meanings that a play might have, and that the audience, in a sense, is the ultimate authority in terms of how they or you as individuals interpret that show. So this production, starts originally this Norwegian text through the filter of a German translator, and then into a German production context. Richard Rose goes over to Berlin, sees this production, thinks, I love it. I can't afford to bring it to Toronto, but there's something about not only the text, but the production itself and what it's expressing that could really work, he feels, in Toronto. So we bring it over. Maria Milosavljevic, who's a German playwright, is contracted to do the translation. But other people are chipping in. The actors are chipping in during the rehearsal process. I put in my 2 cents about the text, so does Richard. I think at one point Holger does as well, who happens to be sitting in on rehearsals, and it truly is kind of a collaborative beast. And then we get, and what we also get here is a kind of our acting styles that are really different from German acting styles. Although, I gotta say, with this particular production in Germany, there are many ways in which it is not a standard approach to acting in Germany. It's more, let's say, attentive to naturalism in a kind of way.
I could say a word about that. Oh, sorry, question.
But I see Anne.
Well, I just had a question, David, about you being in rehearsal last year.
Yeah.
And referring to what Holger was saying about these really overt political intentions. What was that part of the rehearsal process? Like, not only talking textually, but talking politically. Did that get taken up in the rehearsal process?
Yeah, it was not so much in terms of globalization and the effects of neoliberalism and how that affects our behavior. I'm sorry?
Whistleblowers.
Whistleblowers.
Oh, whistleblowers. Yes. But there were certainly political discussions about how much agency do we have as individuals? Where does kind of Canadian complacency in terms of politics fit in? That's a huge deal. And then in terms of particular events like Walkerton, the oil sands, all of those kind of issues certainly acted as fuel for the actors. Definitely.
Yeah.
It's
I've seen the play last year and this year, and I was talking to a colleague about it yesterday, and she said, "Oh, I wouldn't go to see that. I find his work very dark."
Ibsen's?
It is dark.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
I didn't see it as that way. I saw it as bringing issues to the forefront.
Right.
Yeah.
As some of the issues, places you've just mentioned, and trying to bring it to a level for discussion and to correct it, to try and dialogue, and rather than put it under the rug and not deal with it.
Right. But that is, I mean, I guess it depends what you want from theatre, right? I mean, I agree with you, right? But of course, in doing that, like if you focus on things that are wrong and insist on talking about them, right, uncomfortably so, it's not. I'm not sure dark is what I'd say, but serious.
Yeah.
And it's not theatre that wants to be just entertaining, right? Now, personally, I think that's what theatre should be doing, right? But I also understand the point of view saying, well, my life is stressful enough. I just want to.
But I mean, the point is to try to create something that's not necessarily dark in the sense that it's depressing or making you feel like there's no point, but it's actually to create an arena for people to be lively and engaged.
No, I know that you mentioned depressing. Maybe that's where she was coming from, but I certainly didn't see it that way. I see it as topics that we need to discuss and try to deal with.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of mopey productions of Ibsen. And it attempts to be a corrective to that.
Yes.
I saw the production here last year, and I loved so many aspects of it. One aspect I wanted to ask you about was the improv section, where the actors are in the audience are
It's a spoiler alert. Spoiler alert, be careful, because not everybody here has seen it, so they don't know about that.
But that wasn't all the reviews.
Be careful.
No big secret, but anyway, I'm not going to say anything about what was said.
Right.
That way of going about it and involving the audience, right?
Yeah.
Was that unusual for this particular play, like in other productions in Germany or historic ones here in Canada?
It's funny. So that particular, it's become, and not because of the Schaubühne production, but sort of at that moment, that became a thing. So there were two productions of Enemy of the People in Berlin at the same time in 2012, and both of them, in the moment, so this really doesn't require a spoiler because it's in Ibsen's. One of the beautiful things about staging old plays is that you can just assume that everyone has read the play, even if you haven't. But so in Act 4 in Ibsen's play, Dr. Stockmann gives this speech that is supposedly about the poisoned water in the baths, but actually turns out to be a fundamental speech about the illness of contemporary society and the deep rottenness of democracy, and is essentially the implausibility of majority rule. In this version of the text, it's a slightly different argument, but it also is much bigger than the ostensible point of the play, of the action of the play leading up to that point, which is the poisoned waters. Now, the other production in Berlin was both of those productions, at that point in the play, opened the discussion up to the audience in slightly different ways. So what you'll see here, what you'll experience here, this is a remount, but it's still going to be exciting when it happens, but I'm just going to tell you that it happens. Like suddenly people get to talk. Now, in the other production in Berlin, at the Gorki Theatre, which is one of the other 5 major theatres in Berlin, at that point it was slightly different. It seemed like there was intermission, and everyone left. Everyone had to leave. They got everyone out of the theatre. We assumed to check for a set change. So everyone was in the lobby, and suddenly Dr. Stockmann showed up with a megaphone and started hectoring everyone. And it was great. And what happened in that production was that she was also played by a female actor in that production. She started talking in what sounded sort of a fervent manner and strident, but not terribly objectionable to the for the sort of broad liberal consensus of most Berlin theatre-going audiences. And then it started to sound slightly off, and it got more off, and people were starting to object to the things she was saying, and it became not exactly riotous, because everyone, of course, still knew that this was an actor doing saying the unacceptable things, but people started loudly objecting to her. And then it turned out, if you look to the program, that what she was saying, that her words were taken from letters written by Ulrike Meinhof, one of the Baader-Meinhof left-wing extremist terrorist group of the 1970s. Whose personal biography was exactly that trajectory as well, starting from the sort of democratic left and becoming more and more radical. But it did a similar thing, right? It also opened it up to the audience in a way and pulled the audience into the play. And there's a recent production that just opened in Zurich, which is doing exactly the same thing, except you can choose to stay in the theatre or go into the lobby, and they have video transmissions from one to the other. But it's again, like there's clearly this urge to take this particular scene and not just have on stage a character hectoring the majority, but to turn that exchange into one between you, right, the broad population, and this individual, and then to do something with that confrontation that breaks open the theatrical event or that does something with the spectator actor relationship. Right? That's now something that seems to have become almost standard with Enemy of the People.
But there's something also too about just the nature of the play seems to have a kind of, I don't know, a character to it, or something that, because it stages political discourse, it's sort of that's at its heart, that it really, that audiences, even a long time ago, 100 years ago, felt engaged in that same way. And there's something I mentioned in the program note about a production of, from the Moscow Art Theatre, that Stanislavski, the actor-director, this is in 1905, I think, there had been a riot in St. Petersburg, and that day, and then in that evening, the stage was rushed when he was giving his town hall speech, and he was championed by what he calls in his diary the revolutionists, and that it really there was a kind of it punctured something, or it released this energy that made the audience or sort of factions within the audience, it energized them politically in such a way. So it's that bridging, or that dynamic of the individual and the body politic, or between the actor and the audience, that tension, has always been something that this play can release.
And it's funny that I think it's the Russian connection is really intriguing, given that. So when the Schaubühne production traveled, they traveled a lot. When it traveled to Moscow, that happened. So in Act 4, the stage was rushed. Like the entire stage, there's video of this, like the entire stage is full of audience members, and they all want to discuss and want to keep talking. And then the actor playing Stockman gets up on like the podium and says, so this is sort of an unusual situation now. It's obviously he's not in character at all.
No, he's...
So we could keep this going. I don't know if you want to see Act 5. And the funny thing is
they take a vote.
They take a vote, yes. And they vote to see Act 5. But the funny thing is that Christoph Gavetta, who's playing that character, in an interview said that was kind of the ideal thing. Like that's what they would have loved to happen every night in Berlin, that the audience would take such ownership of that moment that the story actually becomes irrelevant.
I talked to the director, Thomas Ostermeyer, and he said that is the ideal. They hadn't been to Moscow at that point, but he says that's the ideal kind of end point of the show, is that we never get to Act 5, and that the audience takes over, you know. And he was that production has toured the world, and he said in some places it almost got to that point.
Yes.
You seem to be really focusing 2 years in a row on the German interpretation and aspects of Ibsen. Is this the same as last year, and if so, why? Because a lot of us come to all the plays every year.
That's a great question. It's in one sense it is the same in that the staging, the design, the opportunities it gives for the audience, the translation is essentially the same, but half the cast is different. And a major difference is Laura Condlin is now playing Thomasina Stockman. And I just bumped into her a little while ago, and I've seen.
Cosmetic.
It's not cosmetic. It's not. No. It's. I mean, I don't mean. I don't mean to be so broad. But it is. But it isn't. But I don't. I really disagree. That. And I was saying to Laura, her sensibility, not necessarily as a woman, but just her, reveals new meanings in this play. That anytime when you cast a play, that's what they say, casting is like 80% of any production, is that you've got a new canvas, in a sense. The shape and meanings of a performance, some meanings of that role will be lessened, and then others will really come out and be really sharpened. You change the actor in any production, and then it will illuminate new meanings. That's why we say that the author is not the final arbiter of meaning in the theater. It's the audience, and via the actor. And so that's why I say, like, it's a very different sensibility. The relationship between Stockman and her brother is totally different. And the one with Mrs. Stockman, Katerina, that relationship too is very, very different.
So they have more directorial freedom, interpretive freedom.
Richard is he loves actors. And he depends on actors to show him what those new meanings ought to be. And once he sees, I've worked with Richard a bunch of times, and once he sees something, it's always got to be alive and fresh and have a movement to it, an action, then he'll embrace that and support it. So he saw an opportunity when he found out that I think Joe had a job in LA and wasn't able to do the remount. And here was an opportunity to really find out how can we just discover more of this play through this particular casting.
So I'll add two things to that. Right? So I saw 2 days ago, last night, when did I see it? So in some ways, what surprised me about the remount was how identical passages were, right? Like how little. So if this to go back to Germany, right? If this had been a German remount, it would have been more different than it is. However, the central figure, Laura Condon's interpretation of that figure is so different than Joe Copham's. They're just two different characters, and I think that's really fascinating. It's something that in other theater cultures, audiences have much more opportunity to observe, right? What happens when two different actors play the same role? For us, the only plays with which we get to see that is with Shakespeare, pretty much, right? I think it's one of the great it's one of the things that makes me most sad about Canadian theatre, but which I feel very positively in many other ways, but the fact that we don't give audiences that opportunity to see what an actor does with a role, and how different that can be from actor to actor. This show, this remount, gives you that opportunity if you saw it last year. And it's amazing, actually. It's less obvious at the beginning. I think there's something that happens like, to her interpretation of the character that, especially in Act 4 and 5, it's a completely different show. Especially in Act 4. Like her Stockman is so different than Joe's. And it's really fascinating, I think. Partly because it is in many other ways the same show, it becomes all the more obvious just how different that central character in it is.
Which is not to say that Joe wasn't exquisite.
Oh, no. I didn't say better, I didn't say better or worse.
No, I know, and really nor did I. Like, I just wanted to make that point, that he was, it's just very different.
I'm sorry, but the audience has to get to their Act 1. So thank you very, very much. I know. An hour or something.